Good afternoon. Mike Dugan here, and welcome to our Humpday Hangout today. We are going to be talking about carbon monoxide emergencies and some of the things that we have dealt with in our career. We are joined by some of our usual panels: Sam Hiddle, Clark Lamping, Darrell Liggins, and we have one guest. And Chief, if you'd introduce yourself, please.
Hi, thanks, Cap. Ed Collet from the Jackson Township Fire Department in Ohio, up in Stark County near the Football Hall of Fame.
Thank you, Chief. We appreciate it, Ed. So first off, we'd like to say thank you to Keyhose. That's keyhose.com for sponsoring this group chat, this Google Hangout. We really appreciate it. We also like to say thank you to the boss, Bobby Halton, for allowing us to do this. But Keyhose sponsors us and keeps coming back every month. We can't imagine why, but they keep doing it. So we thank them very much for that. And we're going to talk today about carbon monoxide and something that I am very, very familiar with. I've dealt with it quite a few times in my career. And again, we've all been around. If you're in a small rural department up to a large suburban department like my own, you go to carbon monoxide calls. You go to smells and bells. And sometimes they're nothing, and other times they can be something. And my call was an epiphany to me. We went down to a carbon monoxide leak in an older brownstone in Brooklyn, and it was just one-on-one, an engine in a truck, and they send an engine just in case they need medical assistance. And we went down there, and there's a gentleman met us on the front porch, and he's got the carbon monoxide detector in his hand, and it's beeping. And I'm like, okay, the battery's gone. And he goes, yeah, I thought so too, but I put a new battery in it. And I said, oh, well, maybe the detector's bad. He goes, yeah, I'm kind of just a little concerned because this was the one up in the sleeping level, up where my kids sleep. And I just had some work done on the oil burner, and I was a little concerned. And kids and oil burner, and it just clinked. And I said, you know what? We're going to check this one out, guys. And we had our meters with us, and we went in there. And it turned out to be in his daughter's bedroom, there was a reading of 500 parts per million. Up in the attic, because it was an old brownstone, there was a reading of over, we were over limit, 999. It was 1,000 parts per million or better. And what had happened is it was an older brownstone, and the chimney did not have a flue in it. So the mortar up in the attic space, right above his daughter's bedroom, had kind of disintegrated a little bit or deteriorated, whatever you want to call it, where the chimney took a turn. And right over her bedroom was where the chimney was bad. Now, I was almost to the point of nonchalanting this call, of saying, you know what, he's got the detector in his hand, then it's beeping out on the front yard. It hasn't cleared. He said he put a new battery in it. It continued to beep. And I'm like, and then he mentioned his kids and the oil burner being worked on. And I'm like, I'm going to go up there and check this out. Well, I learned a lesson from that point on that I never, ever, ever nonchalanted a carbon monoxide detector going off. I took the reading so I could go back and I could relax in the firehouse with a clear conscience. And this is just one of the ones. And I know there were tons of other ones, and we can talk about some of the other ones as we go through this. So carbon monoxide and its effect, and it's not just from the fuel burning appliances and everything else. We'll talk about it at fires and other things as we go through today. And if you have any questions, anything you want to talk about, the hashtag is FE Talks, hashtag FE Talks. And we will get that to us, and we will try to answer your questions if we can. So let's start with the panel. Sam, carbon monoxide.
How are you guys doing today? As far as a carbon monoxide story, I really don't have anything that stuck out that's significant. I will tell you that, like you said, it doesn't matter how big of a job you are, you're going to run them. I keep notes on my phone as far as a checklist, so that when we go through, it's just a reminder of things to look at. Sometimes it's as simple as just asking them, hey, It's a Sunday morning as everyone taking a hot shower and getting ready for church. That can cause the hot water heater to kick it off. Like you already mentioned, batteries, they have a lifespan on them. So that just helps us go down a checklist. And then when we can't really identify a source, we just end up bringing out the utility company as a second reference.
That's great. And I think that's something we all have to think about. If you're getting a reading, you need a utility company, and they've got to come in and determine what they're going to do for this system. And again, one of the times I really remember it, we had a very damp, wet, foggy Thanksgiving one year, and I was working on Thanksgiving, and they called it an inversion, which was keeping everything down. We must have had that Thanksgiving day, we must have had 20 to 25 CO runs in the day tour, just because everything was down, people cooking in their buildings with the gas stoves, with all of the burners on, people taking showers, waiting for the family. We just ran these things. It was nonstop. So, yeah, and I mean, this is something, having that list is a great thing for us to do. And I think it's something that's very, very important to us. Clark, how about you?
First of all, Sam, I like that idea of the list. I had never thought about that. That's fantastic. But I like Sam. I don't have a lot of suppression stories that really stick out to me. I have a couple stories of lack of education that we've actually killed people in my first in. We had a power outage several years ago, and a guy had a generator, and he put the generator in his garage, inside his garage, closed the doors, and he ran this generator and powered his house. And the neighbor hasn't heard from him in 2 days, and he shows up, the whole family died. He killed his whole family because of it. And just this year, a couple months ago, it got cold, and we had this Hispanic family, very poor family, working people, and they took a barbecue. They took a propane barbecue and put it inside their house and lit the barbecue, kept everything away from it so we didn't have a fire. But fortunately, they started feeling the effects. They started getting dizzy and sick, and they left the house. But I don't know how many minutes it would have taken, but we would have killed another family. And that's just a lack of education. And like I've said over and over again, we save more people on this job with prevention and education than we ever do with suppression. And I don't know how we get the word out to these people, but you know, in 2018, we're almost killing people because they're making dumb mistakes. So.
And I think that's, you know, I've also had the shop owner cleaning his restaurant one night in Brooklyn, and he brought the power washer inside because he was afraid they were going to steal it if he left it out on the sidewalk. So he got the power washer inside, and he's cleaning the place, and he falls out of it almost drunk from the carbon monoxide, the symptoms of the CO poisoning, and he's down on the street. And we ended up on the top floor. The woman and her 3 kids, they were all unconscious because it was heated carbon monoxide, which tends to ride. Again, carbon monoxide has the same, almost the same specific gravity as air, and it depends on if it's heated or cooled carbon monoxide where you're going to see it accumulating. So I think those are great points. And we also had one here locally where I live after Superstorm Sandy, where a guy was afraid somebody was going to steal his generator and pulled it into his garage, and his kids were upstairs, and he killed his 2 kids who lived over the garage. I don't know how somebody gets over that situation. It's just, it's incredible. And you're 100% right. It is, it's definitely education in this and the idea of the things that are going on there. So, Chief Ed, how about you?
Hey, thanks, Cap. Actually, had one that wasn't so much, it didn't end up being a CO call, but it showed out some of the things we had to look for in our meters. We got a CO call. We showed up at the house. It was in a kind of the attached, it wasn't quite like your row houses or something, but it's kind of attached houses in our area, smaller, larger apartments. And I'm looking, and we got CO reading in this house. They didn't have, you know, no natural gas appliances were on. There wasn't anything that should have been producing CO, but we were getting high enough readings. We, you know, checked that out. We actually went next door and checked that unit out. By this time, our normal response is a medic unit. We always take a medic unit to a CO call, just in case. It gives us a place to put the residents. If they do have the higher COs, we can get them out of that environment. We kept going around. By this time, now we have an engine there and a truck, and we went around to this entire complex, could not find anything that was producing CO. You know, nothing was on. We ended up finally, the PD came so we could get entry into the one unit that no one was home at. We went into the attached garage, and there was a battery on a charger, and the H2S sensor in our meter spiked off the roof right there. So what had happened, and this is one of the things you have to know your meters pretty well on, you can cross-contaminate your CO with H2S. So what everyone's in the vicinity of that complex, what they were actually picking up on their CO was the H2S that was coming in. So, you know, that was a good lesson for us, that we have cross-contamination we have to look out for. So you may go in and look for things, even if people have, you know, no, you know, fossil fuel utility or anything like that going on. If they're charging a battery, once that starts to cook, you can get a reading on your CO meters.
Was it a dry trap or was it a battery?
It was a battery.
Okay, because you can get the same thing from a dry trap.
Yeah.
That's great. And just in case some of our folks don't understand, what is H2S?
Hydrogen sulfide.
Hydrogen sulfide, which happens when you charge batteries. You can also get it from, as Sam said, from sewer gas, we like to call it. The same thing. And anybody who's ever smelled it knows exactly what it smells like. So that's great. So good. And now we have somebody joining us who hasn't been with us for a while. Daryl, good to see you, brother.
Yeah, how are you been? Happy New Year, first hangout of the year.
Yeah.
2019. The years are just clicking away.
Wow.
And I started my career in 1993 was my first year in the fire service. And during this hangout, we're talking about getting CO calls. We didn't have CO calls in my first fire department back in 93. Homes didn't have CO detectors. I don't remember, we didn't have paramedics, so we weren't trained on symptoms of, you know, EMS of CO emergencies, at least in my neck of the woods at that time. And I remember my first CO related call that we knew it was, and it was a poorer part of town where they brought in, like Clark said, a barbecue into this home to warm it up, just the coals. And we thought it was just somebody flailing on the ground and being agitated. And then they said, hey, there's somebody else in the back bedroom. We go there and there's somebody else. It's like, what's going on? Is this some type of poisoning? And the officer at the time saw the barbecue out on the outside walkway, and then found out that had been in the house. At the time, it was just a question, what's CO? Because we really didn't have much training on it. But anyway, I want to thank Battalion Chief Trait Frank Montagna. I'm sure you know him. This is a book called Responding to Routine Emergencies by Fire Engineering, and it's got a great couple of chapters on CO emergencies and how to respond to them, and it changed my approach to how we respond to CO emergencies. So now we have detectors and we have some training. But a couple things I look for right away is when we get off the rig is, does anybody have any symptoms of CO? Headache, vomiting, agitated, whatever you can look up. I'm sure you could Google signs and symptoms of CO poisoning. And if somebody's got some of those symptoms, even if you don't have a detector, then you want to get people out of the house. And then we want to find out if there's CO in the house, and there's no way to do that, or apartment building, whatever the space is. Sometimes it's a car with a bad muffler or something. There's no way to do that without a CO detector. And we are in the city of Oakland. We got CO detectors several years back now. I think it's been about 7 years, and it's been a tremendous help. And then after that, once we determine there's some CO in the house, we want to find out where that is coming from, which is a real difficult part. There's a lot of things that people always look for, like the water heater and the stove, but there could be a lot of outside sources of that too, like the barbecue pits, flues have been one for us. We have a lot of balloon frame construction with outside vents that can be blocked with bird nesting, or somebody using a cheaper flue where it's not venting the heat up and backing up into the house. So we could go through a list of some of the things that can cause high CO levels, but respond to these that it may not always be a false alarm. We do get a lot of false CO alarms, but you have to have a detector, and you have to find out if CO is in the house and if people are having symptoms of CO if you don't have a detector.
I think that's great information, and there are a couple of things that I also think we should talk about with this. And locally here, a couple of years ago, in a mall, in a very big mall, there was a chain restaurant, and we're not going to name them for obvious reasons, but they had a CO problem in their basement, in their kitchen, down in the basement, because again, they cooked downstairs and there was something that had gone wrong. And somebody called in for somebody sick in the basement, and the PD responded and the medics responded. PD went running in and started to do what they had to do. Well, the medics showed up, and this is something that to me is really, really important. The medics on this local company had taken on their bags, they have a CO meter on their medic bags. So they bring it in. All of a sudden, they're in this restaurant, and they're not even in the basement yet, and the meter's singing, and they're looking like, holy crap, everybody out, everybody out. They're getting everybody out. Well, the cops start stumbling out of the basement. They got to call the fire department. Guys got to mask up. They got to go downstairs. They've got to search the basement. Unfortunately, in this one, the manager of the restaurant was using the bathroom. He was on break, and he passed away in an enclosed bathroom down in the basement. So the meters are the number one key to this, and having your meters. Sometimes officers bring them on their radio straps. And again, we can talk about this because there are different ways to look at this. I used to have the CO meter when we first got it. I put it on the radio strap. But if you go to a job, that thing's sitting on your chest and it's vibrating back and forth. I thought I was having a heart attack a couple of times. Okay, because like, what the heck is that vibrating on my chest? CO meter was going crazy. So then we ended up getting a separate strap that when you are going on another call, an emergency call or something else, you could put this over your shoulder and just carry the CO meter. You don't really want it at a fire. And you don't want to turn the thing off because somebody forgets to turn it back on and thinks it's on and it's off. So having it on medic bags. The PD locally is now issuing it to all of their people have a CO meter that they wear just going in there, because this can be so hazardous to us. So I think these are some of the things that are a really good idea. You got to set a protocol and have this, because Sam, have you ever gone to a run where you didn't think it was CO and it turned out maybe it was a CO leak?
Yeah, I mean, especially if it's coming from next door. It doesn't always have to be in that occupancy. So absolutely. And if I could backtrack for 1 second, just to what Daryl pointed out, that's what I made my initial list from, was Montagnon's book. Highly recommend that as well.
Yeah, no, it's a great book. And having a list, having a checklist on your phone or something else, even having a list in the vehicle with the grease pencil that you can just go through, and having it inside, having an idea of how you are going to do this and going out on these runs. Very, very, very important that we do this. So, Clark, yourself, anything you've ever gone on one that you didn't think was CO and it turned out?
For years, this is going to sound, I'm almost embarrassed to say it in a panel of my peers, but The PPVs. We bring PPVs to every fire, and at my job, we don't have the tailpipe on the exhaust. You know, fan in the door. How many guys put the fires out? Put the fan in the door. That's all I hear. Put the fan in the door, and we fill that business or house with CO. Fill it to the brink. And I think it was at FDIC a couple of years ago. Someone told me about this, and until then, I didn't even think of it. So now I take a CO monitor after we blow the fan in the door. I take the CO monitor to show my guys, look at the readings we're getting right now. We just filled this whole, smoke's gone, but now we are full of toxic gas. Shut the fan down, and now we have to open all the windows in order to do this. But we did this for years, Cap. We did this for years. I've been on the job 20 years. For 20 years, we've just been putting the fan in the door. Smoke's out, all right, folks, go back in your house. We're leaving, bye. And we turn the house over to the occupants. And I thought, Jesus, man, how we, just, again, not thinking. I don't know. So that's my embarrassing story. Just showed my ass. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Listen, we all if we didn't have embarrassing stories, we wouldn't learn from them. And people not understanding that there is an option with the extender hose to get the exhaust gases for those things away from the building itself, because you're sucking that air right past the exhaust. It makes 100% sense.
Yeah, and like a modified, we had a big fire loading truck on a warehouse dock. Filled the building with smoke. We got the fire out before it extended interior, but a huge warehouse. We put the fans in the door cap. We open up all the roll-ups, and we put the PPVs in backwards. We just caused a draft effect, pooling instead of pushing air. We use the PPVs to kind of pull air because I didn't want to fill this huge. I mean, we're talking millions of cubic feet of space in this warehouse. I don't want to fill that with CO. I don't know how we're ever going to evacuate that. So we just turn the fans on, just try to create some kind of natural movement, and we're pushing all the CO out of the building instead of pushing it in.
That's great. That's great.
Hey, Clark, to that, have you seen or has anyone used the new electric PPV fans?
We've spec'd them, and I believe we have one on the rig. It might even be battery powered, Chief. We might even have a battery powered PPV, because we used to have smoke ejectors for years, and it turns out that we could never. Anytime we tried to use smoke ejectors in a building, it drew so much power. We were blowing breakers all the time. So we got tired of using it. We got tired of blowing breakers. So we just took them all off the rigs. But I think I can't name any names, but I've seen some manufacturers that do sell battery-powered PPVs, and they work really well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we actually, when we went through that transition for the same reason that Clark was talking about, we got some electric fans, and then we still had our gas-powered fans, but the electric fans are doing much better. We primarily use those now. When we first started getting them, they just didn't have the CFM to clear the house. They're doing a lot better. I can't remember the name of it. The first time I saw was at Kentland, but they have a fold-up one where you unfold it at 90 degrees and the battery's on the base that you can throw on your shoulder for high rises. Very nice. They, like I said, a lot more CFM and good battery life on those now.
Yeah. And they're doing very, very well with it. The technology for the motors has come so far in the batteries that they're really becoming very, very, and even some of the electric ones now are working very well because they don't draw as much, so that they won't blow the breakers. Because we all know with the old in the window box smoke ejectors that you hung up, as soon as you plugged it in, you knew you were going to blow the circuit breakers. You knew you were going to break it. We had the pigtails we had to find. Nobody could ever find the crap in the rig. And it used to be, I used to love showing up at a job, and the chief would say, "Hey, Cap, you got a smoke ejector?" "No, Chief, ours is out for repair." Nobody carried a smoke ejector anymore. Nobody. You want to stand there all day with this thing on, and because a smoke ejector, the CFM that it moved was relatively nil. Now we have these fans that are moving so much else, and we also now have the exhaust tubes, which we can use. So if you want to put a fan to pressurize staircases or something else, because again, we made that mistake also. We brought them in to pressurize the staircases for attack fire stairs in high-rise buildings, and we filled the lobby command post. The chief was going wacky. So you got to figure out how you're going to do this and do it properly.
Hey, Sam, on those the backpack one, any idea what that weighs?
Unmute, Sam. Unmute.
There we go. I want to say close to 30 pounds. They're actually pretty comfortable. I'll send you a picture of one.
Would hate to be the rookie that day. Get the fan, rookie. 30-pound fan.
And you got to carry 40 flights.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the topic of the fans, I know each one of our truck companies just got one called a bat fan. It's I don't have experience with it, but it seems like the members are pretty happy with it. And then back to the topic of going to a call that didn't come in as a CO call. Sometimes these come in as medical calls. So as far as having some CO detection on the EMS bag, I think that's a phenomenal idea. It's an excellent idea. I think it's going to help determine what's wrong with the patient much more accurately and quickly if we have some type of, hard evidence that what's going on with them it's not emotional. It's not just a flu, that it's carbon monoxide. I could think of two quick stories that come to mind where it turned out to be CO. It would have been found faster if we had some detection on the EMS bag, but we were just able to determine it through questioning of the patient. We have a lot of RVs in our city, a lot of homeless problem, and they're using generators. And I went to a female that was having, some of those, symptoms. We couldn't quite pin down what was going on. And when I start questioning her boyfriend also in the RV, we've got her on the gurney, he's rubbing his head and saying that he's got a headache and things too. And then I noticed that there was a generator next to an open window. We didn't have a meter on the engine, but I called out the nearest truck company that had the meters at the time. And they came out and found high levels of CO in that RV. So we were able to have both of them transported. So it was very helpful to have a meter or a company with a meter to get dispatched out. Another one was a person, they just drove over the Bay Bridge from San Francisco to Oakland. He pulled over. He said he wasn't feeling good. He's vomiting. No medical history, no allergies or medications or anything like that. I asked if he had any car problems, and he said, actually, yeah, you just had a muffler replaced. They didn't replace too good. He had a friend try to do it or something, and we again called out a company just to, got him out of the car, and there were high levels of CO in the automobile. So point being is sometimes these aren't coming in as CO calls, and we got to be able to kind of figure it out and see if that's a possibility.
Yeah, I think that's a big possibility, and we'll talk a little bit more about those, but I just want to give Chief Ed a chance to jump in on this.
The one thing I like what Daryl brings up is, everyone thinks a CO call is in a building, where you have the potential for a car. Especially, we had not too long ago, one of our PD officers actually came over and got our multi-gas meter because something had come out with one of the manufacturers of the cruisers were saying that there was potential for high CO the way they had done something in the design. So he rode around for like half his shift with the CO monitor in his car just to check out to make sure. And he did, there were elevated levels for him, and especially I like the idea you said your local PD in your area, Cap, is doing their officers are having CO monitors. Think of the amount of time they spend in their cars. I mean, if they get even just a small leak, they could potentially over time get that time weight average up. So I think that's a good thing. Just generally, we have most of the stuff again, we haven't had a whole lot that came in that we had to go to a CO call that it didn't come in as a CO call. But you can always reiterate your position, Cap, of always having that high level of suspicion on anything that says CO. We get not only are batteries dying, people think these things last forever, and they don't. They usually have about a 7-year lifespan, and then they start chirping. So there's a couple different things that, can have people call us to come check their CO levels that may or may not be, a CO call, but we need to make sure we don't come complacent after going to so many of those. Kind of like we did get caught off guard on one. We got a call. It was for one of these like daycare places, and the call came in at like 9:30 at night. So we're thinking, okay, a maintenance guy or something. Well, we get there, there's still kids in the building. We didn't know this is one of those daycare places that goes until like 11, 10 at night, for people at work off shifts. So we're there with the one medic unit. All of a sudden, I've got 12 people that I have to get out of a building, and some are kids. So I'm now getting 2 more medics, getting a truck company there, and we thought it was nothing. It ended up being their furnace malfunctioned, and it ended up being 600 ppm through most of this rather large building. And 2 things to take away from that was, a lot of times we go on a CO call, we think it's the furnace. You turn the furnace on, okay, we get nothing, it's okay. A lot of times if the heat exchangers crack, you need to let that heat up for that crack to open up to actually get the CO to transfer from the furnace side into the air side. So don't, let the furnace cycle a little bit and let it run for a full cycle to make sure that it's not a crack in the heat exchanger that just needs to open up. The other thing with this call that we actually used it for some like flow path training to be able to, as we were clearing the building, we use it to be able to show, some of the guys how the flow path worked as far as opening and closing certain doors and what happened to the airflow.
That's pretty cool. That's a very good idea. And again, you have to clear the area before you can allow the people to reoccupy it, because it's a very, very important part of that. Now, while we're here at this break, I would like to again shout out to our sponsor, Key Hose. That's keyhose.com. They sponsor us every week. And if anybody who has ever watched one of these hangouts before knows, Bill Gustin uses this hose and loves this hose. And if I had to take anything from Bill Gustin, it would be that he is a big proponent of Key Hose. And we thank them for sponsoring this again for us. And I think it's a great thing. And so another one I want to talk to about on all of this is, I know what happened with my dad. And my dad ended up with Alzheimer's in the end stages of his life. And we had to go down and take his car keys away from him. And if anybody's had to do that, you know how tough that is to do. It is emasculating to do to a man and to tell him he can't drive anymore. But my dad had at least 2 times pulled into the garage, got out of the car with the car still running, and got into the house. And this is something with seniors that we have to look at. Again, they're a good thing to have if you have issues, if you are in a senior complex, if you are any place where senior citizens are, get into and check out the parking facilities, where the garages are, where the cars are. If cars are kept indoors, go check the cars. Find out what's going on in there and make sure that you understand where these spaces are, because this air leakage, it can go anywhere. It's part of the issue here. So senior citizens.
Mike, on that topic, I had a run where a house was like mine, an attached garage, and the furnace and the air intake is in the garage. I know some air intakes in older homes are maybe on the floor, some buildings on the ceiling or whatever. But a lot of homes with an attached garage, it's in the garage. And with an increasing amount of cars with these automatic starts with the key fob, people get up in the morning, they turn on their heater, that kicks on the fan to start blowing some air into the house. They go to make their coffee and start their car remotely with the garage door closed. And those cars often, they'll warm up for 10, 15 minutes before they automatically shut off. I know my vehicle automatically shuts off if it's been 10 or 15 minutes, but in this case, it set off the CO alarm in the house. when we get there, there's no car running or anything, but, you know, just in our investigation, going in the garage, you could just smell the exhaust. And, you know, it was, don't do that anymore. Even though you weren't in the presence of the garage and could be harmed at that time, that exhaust was going through and getting blown through the house.
That's a great point. I never even thought of that one. And I know with my truck, my keys, if I have them in my pocket, I have started my truck on more than one occasion in my pocket by mistake. And that's why with my dad, unfortunately, before he left us, but we installed CO detectors in their garage, and one right inside the kitchen, right by the garage door, so that if he did it by accident, we would know about it. And I think it's something that's very, very important, knowing where you're going to. Are you going to a senior citizen facility? As Chief Collet said, if you're going to a daycare center with kids in that place, the kids are much more susceptible to the CO than we are as adults. And also in a daycare center, I expect to see women who might be pregnant working in there. A lot of times the school teachers, and anyone who is pregnant is more susceptible to this, and the elderly. So we have to know where we're going and do our due diligence and our size up and go through this whole thing. The other
one thing we haven't really talked about is that CO, although we're dealing with a lot of the medical emergencies, people forget that we should have our turnouts and our full PPE when we respond to these, because it is an explosive, potentially explosive gas. You know, I don't quote me on the numbers. I think over like what 12,800 parts or something like that. This could be particularly, you know, like in concealed spaces after a structure fire where you had a lot of smoldering going on, maybe some void spaces and a knee wall void or something like that. We can have extremely high levels of carbon monoxide that could be potentially explosives.
Yeah, somewhere around 12,000 to 15,000 ppm is where you start getting into the concern range that it'll auto ignite with CO. Because a lot of the work I've done, like in the boiler industry, we get really concerned when we get about 10,000 ppm, because about 15,000, 12,000, 15,000, it can auto ignite on you.
You know, with that said, you're talking about the cars and bringing it all together. The cars can put out up to 30,000.
That's cool. That's good knowledge. I did not know that. Thank you, Sam. And again, it's something that we have to do. Another thing I want to bring up on this that very, very important to me is I know a lot of people got carbon monoxide detectors. And then you ask them, when was the last time this was calibrated? What? What's calibration? What does that mean? How do you do that? What's the deal on that? Again, calibrating your detectors and making sure that your detectors are working properly and in the proper thing. Do we have a policy for that? Sam?
We don't. No.
Okay.
I don't know what else to say.
Okay, ours have a date on them. Ours have a date on them that they were last calibrated, and they have to go out in 6 months from that date to be recalibrated.
Or no, you're talking the department meters, not the residential.
No, the department meters.
Yes, the department meters. Our hazmat team does that for us. They log it. They will call up the companies and require them to come out. So they track and log the calibration of our meters.
Well, unfortunately, some of our brothers and sisters in more rural or smaller departments don't have a hazmat team. They have a county-wide regional hazmat team, and Department A has meter A, and Department B has meter B, and Department C has meter C, and nobody is going through and calibrating these meters and checking them. If you are in a smaller department or you don't know about the calibration of the meters, ask someone and find out if they are calibrated and make sure that they are working properly for us.
Cap, the other thing that goes along with calibrating them on a regular basis, CO, the cells, the electrochemical cells that the CO meter actually uses, they do not have an indefinite lifespan. They do go bad after about 2 to 3 years. A lot of it depends on how much you saturate it. Kind of, if you oversaturate, like you found on your call, you talked about at the beginning of the program, you know, that CO never cleared because that cell stayed saturated in that alarm that the guy had on the street with you. The same thing can happen to our meters, and if they saturate, unless you get them cleared out and get fresh air cleared out, it'll sit there and use the electrolytic chemical and also the catalyst that'll get used up at a quicker rate in your cells. So also make sure you check the life of your cells as you calibrate it, and that's what's going to tell you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and along with calibration, at least our monitors, I'm not familiar with all the monitors out there, far from it, but they need to be turned on in clean air outside. So we have a policy, it needs to be turned on en route, put out the window, en route in clean air, and then we'll approach the building, vehicle, whatever it is, you know, once there. They're not going to read accurately if you go in the building and then decide to turn it on.
Okay.
We do the same thing, Daryl. As soon as we're on a CO call, we get the monitor out in the truck. We fire it up in the truck as we're rolling. Because it takes a while. It takes a good, minute or so, 2 minutes to get fully functional once it goes through all the system checks and things.
Cool. Cool. Now, I'm going to talk about another story that's a CO story that I had. It was very interesting. Went to fill out the alarm for a water leak. And I'm the ABC acting battalion chief. And I'm on the radio. I'm like, Battalion 3-8 to Brooklyn K, fill out the alarm for a water leak. And they're like, 10-4, chief. We had a truck on a water leak call, and it turns out the water was coming from a discharging sprinkler head, and it was a warehouse, and it was cardboard boxes in the area where this water leak was. And the truck company officer, very smart guy, went up there, and they had a water leak, and they got there, and they could hear the gong going off, and he thought it was a frozen pipe or whatever else. And they went up there, they forced the door, and he looked in and he could see cold smoke, and he could hear the sprinkler going off. And he said to the guys, let's go back downstairs, fill out the alarm, put on all their air packs and everything else, because very honestly, most of us would not bring an air pack to a water leak. I never would. Not going to do it. It's a water leak. Well, it turned out to be, it was a cold smoke fire. It was deep set in cardboard boxes stacked. So the carbon monoxide readings inside the building, again, as we said with Chief Ed, were over the limits, okay? And doing the search, venting the building, finding the fire. I mean, the good thing finding the fire, it's easier if you use your thermal imaging camera properly and know how to use it. You look up and you can tell from the cold which sprinkler head is going off. And the sprinkler head's going off with the black showing you where the cold water is coming down. That indicates where the fire was. So you now concentrate on that area and go over there and look for this. But companies did a great job. And it's very important that we understand that this carbon monoxide, I mean, I had friends tell me stories about an old John's Bargain basement. The guys stumbling out of the basement of John's from the CO in the basement fire, from a small fire, and the guys stumbling out of the basement with carbon monoxide poisoning, and they just barely got everybody out of that basement. Understanding from our operational standpoints that this carbon monoxide is going to be there, and there is no ifs, ands, or buts. If you run out of air, if you have a problem on this with a close call, you are not going to make out very, very well there. Sam.
Yeah, I want to piggyback. I'm sorry, go ahead, Daryl.
I was just thinking, since you mentioned the thermal imaging camera, how important it is to bring all your tools. If we bring in that CO monitor, I ask my crew to also bring in the thermal imaging camera, and just a quick war story of getting a CO call. It was a 2-story house. We had just a very light haze throughout the building. I wouldn't say we had like smoke visible, but it was just, hey, there's something going on here. There's a little bit of a haze. The CO monitor is going bananas and, very high levels. Nobody's having any symptoms at the time. But with the camera, we find a planter box, a pottery planter box that is showing up very hot. And there was no indication it was hot. It wasn't smoking or anything like that. But the occupant said that she was using incense and sticking the end of the incense into the soil of the planter box. She had done that hours ago. That wasn't visible. When the firefighters go to carry the planter box out of the house, their gloves start getting, hot. They make it outside. They drop the pot because their hands are starting to burn. When that breaks open, the root system was burning, and it burst into flames, and it was like, okay, well, I guess we found the source. But there was really no indication to find that unless we had the camera and found this planter box was hot.
And that's another great point, because you can also find out what appliance had been burned last and everything else. And that's a very, very good thing. And again, yes, if we were wearing the CO detector on every call, we turned it on every call except if we were going to a reported fire, because I didn't want to have that, felt like my defibrillator was kicking in, but I didn't want that to happen. So but that's a good thing. And again, it's using all your tools correctly. Go ahead, Sam, you had something to say.
I was going to piggyback on kind of what you were saying as far as things filling up. And we haven't really talked about the fire application of it yet. But one of the things is, even if you have a small fire in an apartment, it's very important to us that we check the adjacent apartments above, below, and to the side. There was a lady in Detroit in a detached house. So she was in a single family occupancy, and being older and having more morbidities, she had passed just from the fire next door.
Wow. I had that in Brooklyn also, where the guy was in a different building. They had an attached common wall, and the people didn't realize up in the brownstones, it was one of the brownstones with a vent in the cockloft or attic space, and it went in, and it was right above his bedroom. He was in the next building over and passed away. So again, unfortunately, a hard lesson learned.
Hey, Sam, you say you go through and you make sure you check with your meter for the CO. Everything's coming out now about hydrogen cyanide and the burning plastics. Are you using a multi-gas meter when you do like your secondary searches and your final, walkthrough of your buildings after you put out the fire, to make sure, are you using HCN as well as CO just to check out for overhaul?
We have a 4-gas, and as you know, I recently got demoted to an engine. But when I was on the truck, I legitimately look at ventilation. It was taught to me very early by a very good chief. Ventilation is start to finish. So as soon as the fire's out, we would have a guy go get that gas meter, and he would walk around. We would get the electric fans going, and 35 parts per million is our action level for our policy. And we continue to ventilate while guys are in there, or we require them to be on air. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah. And I was also wondering, do you also look at hydrogen cyanide too? I know probably with the 4-gas, you're probably not, but no. Do you ever use a 5-gas to look at hydrogen cyanide too? Or is anyone doing that for overhaul?
Now, if we're worried about that, then we usually end up getting the hazmat team. But as far as a overhaul policy, no, we don't.
Clark.
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of research on that burning plastics and things like that. It's one of the things I teach at FDIC, and just coincidentally, hydrogen cyanide is what we used to use to kill people in gas chambers several years ago. And that's the stuff we are standing in these buildings after these polystyrenes, plastics burn. That is one of the major things that off gases. And so we're pretty much got 2 full companies inside of a gas chamber working, huffing and puffing without our SCBAs on. So pretty bad business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead, Daryl.
Yeah. In our city, we do not have any policy of when people could take off their SCBAs based on gas meter detection and overhaul or anything. Our specific detectors will clog up with that type of smoke, so we don't use our detectors during fires. I think gas detection could be a wise thing, but I would definitely caution people not to make that the end-all answer if it's safe to overhaul without SCBA or not, and just be aware of all the dangers that could occur during overhaul stages. I mean, you could have, weakened floors and burned out stairs, other types of gases, things going on where you may still have some hazards during the overhaul stage, even if the gas levels are safe to operate in.
Absolutely. And again, I mean, listen, you look at the statistics. Unfortunately, Captain Gustin's not with us, but I think the Miami-Dade Fire Department, I think the last statistic I heard is 63% of the retirees have some form of cancer. It's scary, and I think I heard, and I'm not 100% if this is true or not, but I think I heard that a quarter, 25% of the job, people still on the job have had some sort of cancer. Listen, we want to live long and prosper after the job. So protecting ourselves from these gases, whether it is carbon monoxide, whether it's hydrogen cyanide, any of the other gases that are in this toxic soup, is something we have to do to take care of ourselves. And for those of us in leadership positions, company officers especially, you are on the front lines with the brothers and sisters. You have to be the one who sets the example. You have to be the person who's showing them what you want them to do and make it that it's, I remember as a young man in the fire department being yelled at for wearing an SCBA to an oil burner fire. And I mean, that black, I had to take mine off, and that black stuff coming down your nose, and I used to have color in my mustache, but my red mustache was black because of the stuff that was coming out. And I mean, it was on your hands, and you touch anything, and it was, whatever. And this is so important is that, listen, this stuff, some of it is cumulative. Some of it is you keep on getting worse from this. This is something so important that we have to take care of our brother and sister firefighters and make sure that they are going to be safe and go home the same way they came there. So we only have a couple of minutes left. So I'm going to ask for closing statements. I'll start with Daryl, if you would please, sir.
Yeah, I guess in conclusion, just realize that if you're going to CO calls and your organization does not have CO detectors, you need to find a way to get one. Even if you could only get one into a chief's car and they have to get special called out, or only on your ladder companies, preferably every company could have them, and we could have one on EMS bags, but we know that could be cost prohibitive to some organizations, but it's still not an excuse to not have some type of detection that you get in your organization, as well as people getting up to speed if your organization doesn't have paramedics or whatever, of what the signs and symptoms of a patient with CO emergencies could be.
Thank you. Thank you. Ed.
I think the biggest thing is, like Daryl just said, make sure you have meters if you're going to these calls. You know, we've all run across the guy who goes, yeah, I taste and smell the CO for this. Yeah, it's high CO. You know, what he's smelling and tasting is the volatile organic compounds from incomplete combustion, and that's a whole nother bag. But the other thing is, know whatever meter you get. Know what type of cross contaminations there could be for readings. Know how often it needs to be calibrated. Know about how long the cells last, and make sure you do the maintenance on it. And just always have a high level of suspicion. You know, when you go on these calls, even if something doesn't feel right, and like anything else, treat the call and treat the patient. Don't treat the monitor. So if your monitor's telling you one thing, but you got two people with flu-like symptoms, and you kind of have that gut feel that something's not right here, go with your gut. You know, like we say in EMS, we treat the patient, not what the equipment's telling us. So, you know, keep that in mind as well.
Clark.
I learned, as I always do, I learned a lot about this conversation just from the people on the panel. So thank you very much for that. Daryl, as you were saying, find ways to get yourself a monitor. Absolutely. I don't know much about the grant writing process, but I'm pretty positive that you could get a grant for some monitors with a couple of agencies in your jurisdiction. That's another option if you don't have these monitors. And I would encourage everyone, you know, like I said, what we did with our PPVs. If you're using PPVs as a test, when you're done with the PPV, take your monitor into that building and see if it's just done to that house or that building. I promise you're going to be astonished. So until next week, brothers and sisters in the American Fire Service, thank you.
Stan.
I would just throw this out. If you can't get a grant, you know, it's sometimes the local utility company, particularly if they don't have a lot of people on call in the late hours, they may pony up the money to get you a monitor, just so that you can mitigate a lot of it on your own without having to bring them out. The other thing I would say also is some of those cheaper, like 4-gas monitors, they also have a shelf life like the cells. So be aware of that. Sometimes we're using old monitors that have expired.
And that's a very, very valid point. And again, know your tools, know your job, be prepared for this, and take time, look up Chief Montagna's book on routine emergencies. I know one story in the FDNY from guys. I was not at the run, but guys went to a detector going off, and the neighbors called, and they said, there's a detector going off. They're driving us crazy. We banged on the door, and they're not answering the door. And the guys took the door and walked in and tripped over the dog. The dog was unconscious. And they had the unit water heaters in the apartments had filled the apartment up, and they were like, holy mackerel. You know, they got the family out. Everybody survived, including the dog. But be prepared. Be prepared for this. I want to thank all of our panelists for being on again this week. I want to thank Penwell and the Clarion Media Group for sponsoring this. Thank you, Bobby. And we also want to thank Keyhose for allowing us to be on with you again this month. We will see you next month. And thank you all, and be safe and be well. Thank you.